Hello and welcome to today's Trading Tech Insight webinar on best approaches to trade and transaction reporting. My name's Adrian Sharp. I'm a contributing editor at A-Team Group. I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, there are a few items to alert you to. Upcoming events, you'll find the details at the bottom of the screen. So coming up, webinar Enhancing Trader Efficiency with Interoperability. That's coming up on September 17th. Following week, September 23rd, we've got another webinar, the role of data fabric and data mesh in modern trading infrastructures. And then last but not least, our Buy Build conference returns to London on October 2nd under the Future of Capital Markets Technology banner. So check those events out. Please check them out. Today's webinar is being sponsored by the Derivatives Service Bureau. It's being conducted under the Chatham House rule. That states that participants and attendees are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of any of the speakers should be revealed. I'll ask you to please respect that rule, attendees. I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves in a minute, but for the audience, just a few pointers on how you can participate in today's event. To the right of your screen, you'll see a Slido panel with tabs for polls and questions. We'll be running 3 polls today. We'll actually be starting off with a poll, and please participate, and that helps us gauge industry opinion. If you'd like to ask any questions, click the questions tab. We'll actually be gathering questions right from the outset. I'll open the questions up probably around halfway through, and we'll go on from there. So I'm going to ask the panelists now to introduce themselves, starting with Catherine.
Thank you, Adrian. My name's Catherine Sutcliffe. I'm Head of Regulatory Affairs for the Derivatives Service Bureau, an industry utility which provides the ISIN, UPI and CFI codes for OTC derivatives.
Great stuff, thanks. And Mark?
Yeah, my name's Mark Bennell. I head up the regulatory operations at Man Group, so primarily focusing on kind of EMIR and MiFID trade transaction reporting.
Great stuff. And Dodd?
Good afternoon, Adrian. My name's Dowd Hark. I run a team called Market Initiatives for Regulatory Transformation and Strategy at Deutsche Bank. I'm chair
Fantastic.
of the
Okay, so
committee and co-chair of the DSB Analyst Product Committee.
Great stuff. Okay, so we'll actually kick off with our first audience poll. So we could put that up on the screen for our audience. What are the biggest challenges to achieving high quality regulatory reporting? This is multiple choice. So your choice is embedded UPI LEI codes, keeping reference data current, managing exceptions and reconciliations at scale, translating regulatory updates into systems and controls, integrating across fragmented tooling and architectures, and building skills, capacity, and governance evidence. So consider those chaps and vote, please vote. While the audience is voting, we'll actually get stuck into our first panel question, which basically asks, with ESMA's call for evidence on simplifying regulatory reporting closing September the 19th, where do you see the lowest hanging fruit across the jurisdictions? And I'm going to start with Dodd.
Thank you, Adrian. So ESMA's call for evidence came out on the 22nd of June. It's simplification and reducing burden in financial regulatory reporting. They provided 4 options on a way forwards. 1A is around removal of duplication. 1B is moving from into an event type reporting framework. 2A is a single template to report EMIR, MiFID and SFTR, and 2B is to report everything under a single template. The industry has been working on a shared response, so that's the FIA, GFXD, ISDA have been working on a single response to that. Now, we want to have we definitely see the need for simplification. And we've looked at their guiding principles for that, which is firstly information scope. So they want to retain all of the information that they have today. Now, we don't think that you can do simplification and keep to that principle. So at the heart of our response is actually we want the scope of EMIR and MiFID to be re-evaluated and reduced to its core principles. EMIR is systemic risk reporting and MiFID is market transparency. And so we would like to reduce the number of fields by taking out all of the superfluous fields that are used for things like risk mitigation, and thereby simplifying. Now, strategically, we would look to merge MiFID and EMIR, hopefully, but that's going to be a much longer term goal. But in the near term, it is removing duplication, so ETDs out of EMIR into MiFID, remove dual-sided reporting, so go single-sided, the same way they have in the CFTC in the US. Remove delegated reporting completely. And then on top of that, we're looking at possibly removing valuations and collateral reporting as well, because they can both be inferred. There might be some questions around certain products that aren't mark to market, they're mark to model. So valuations done that way. So we may need to continue doing valuations on the mark to model.
Okay, good stuff. Catherine, from a standards setting body or standards utility, your thoughts on this, on the simplification initiative?
Yes, so we obviously provide a service to firms. We're providing the identifiers that they have to integrate in their workflows to meet their reporting obligations. So from that perspective, I think firms with those obligations are best placed to advise ESMA on their preferred option. But what the DSB can do is look at how we can leverage the data we've got in our standards and identifiers, and how might we be able to provide some insights or some analysis which is going to support decisions and considerations going forward on this. So Daud mentioned a preference for single-sided reporting, and we understand that too. And I think each of the four options ESMA puts forward does include dual-sided reporting, but they also note a possible negative impact of this could be a deterioration in data quality. So one thing we've looked at is how can identifiers and standardization help support a move to single-sided reporting without losing that data analysis, that data quality. What sort of things is it worth pulling forward? So first of all, when you use an identifier, you're minimizing data points. And ESMA did a piece of analysis last year which said they looked at reporting in EMIR and saw that if you use 3 key data points, so in this instance 2 LEIs and an ISIN versus reporting the data in more disaggregated effect, you've got an over 20% consistency rate. So there's evidence there that minimizing the data points is helpful. You're reducing errors. And then we've been doing some analysis on what data elements sit behind our identifiers. So the OTC ISIN has more data elements sat behind it compared to the UPI. So we're looking at some analysis, which is what's the range of additional data elements between the ISIN and the UPI, which identifier therefore might be more useful. Another consideration is from the OTC derivatives perspective. OTC derivatives, some of them have underlying baskets made up of a range of constituents. We've done some analysis there that can range from just a couple of constituents to hundreds to over 2,000. And so again, does the identifier embed those constituents? For the ISIN, yes. For the UPI, no. So again, does it make more sense to use an identifier where they're integrated so you're minimizing those data points? And again, if a data element is inside an identifier, then perhaps there's scope to reduce it if you're having to report it separately again. So those are the sorts of things we're looking at to try and support a move in terms of keeping that data quality if there's a move to single-sided from what we do.
Great.
If I may come back on that.
Go on, Dov.
I completely agree with Catherine's points, and I think it's great because we really appreciate the support of the DSB and leaning into the standards and data standards identifiers means that we reduce the number of fields that we would have to report because they are intrinsically within that identifier.
Yeah.
So certainly, I appreciate ESMA's point around historically they've always wanted dual-sided reporting because they think that it will improve data quality because they can match to both sides. Our advocacy has been that if you allow just the more sophisticated, larger firms to do the reporting, the data quality goes up.
Yeah.
And so we believe that going to single-sided actually will facilitate better data quality and more consistent data quality than continuing in the dual-sided paradigm.
Good, great stuff. I think what we'll do is let's pull up the audience poll results and see what the where we're at here. And oh wow, this is kind of interesting. So, translating regulatory updates into systems and controls, that seems to be the big one. Integrated across fragmented tooling and architectures. Any great surprises here? It looks like embedding UPI and LEI.
Here. I don't think there is.
No.
One of the things we're coming back on in our simplification is actually making the rules more clearer rules. So at the moment there, it's ambiguous. There's a lot of work that's undertaken to translate unstructured language into regulatory change and code. And what we would like to do is the regulators start to implement something more accurate, like code itself embedded within the regulatory text, so that we can just pick that up and we have unambiguous rules.
Yeah, interesting. In fact, I'll pull Mark in a sec, but it kind of takes us into the next question here, which is really about the evolution of digitization across the capital markets, and really how should firms be readying their data, the controls, operating models for this convergence of all of these different initiatives. Machine readable rules from, I think this is DRR, CDM, standardized trade semantics, and GDR, which we're seeing actually starting to come to fruition in APAC, granular data reporting already live at APRA, MAS, and HKMA I think are pretty close. Dawn, I'll start with you, and then I'm going to see what Mark has to say about some of these things from the practitioner perspective.
So we have one of the things that we need to do is to align the industry on what a product is. So very simply, what attributes make up an instrument? What name does that instrument have? And what we're doing is we've created through ISDA something called the DRR, Digital Regulatory Reporting Initiative, and it sits on a bed of code called the CDM, the Common Domain Model. The Common Domain Model in and of itself is a way of representing instruments, and it gives you all of the attributes of that instrument. It tells you what the instrument does. It also says what life cycle events that can happen on that instrument. And what you then do is, on top of that representation, you add different skins. One of the skins is DRR, which is Digital Regulatory Reporting. So you transform the data in the instrument into a reportable shape, which then goes out to different regulators based on a set of rules which sit within the DRR. Now, why the CDM is powerful is because it goes beyond that. You can go into settlements, you can go into risk, you can do lots of other things with the CDM model itself, because it's a representation of a trade. But from our conversation here, the digital regulatory reporting is a key step forwards in automating both the production of reports, but also when a regulation changes, the code can be then released to the firms that are using the DRR, and it can be automatically updated. The downside is that most firms won't implement CDM natively within their own infrastructure. Right. So what you need to do is transform from your own architecture into a CDM object, which then can use a DRR. So where we will see a change then is between the CDM and your internal architecture, rather than from the CDM, from the digital regulatory reporting itself, which is a huge benefit because that goes back to the poll.
Yeah.
The big cost is how to interpret a regulatory change.
Right.
So we think that will take a huge amount of cost out of the market and time to deliver.
Right. Good stuff. Mark, we haven't heard from you yet, so some thoughts from your side of the business.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree in terms of basically the standardization and kind of looking at examples. I mean, something like the DRR is very, it would be very, very beneficial in terms of mapping your internal data in terms of a standardized way of reporting. So what we have seen over, obviously last year we had both 2 EMIR rewrites and ASICs. And of those 2 rewrites, something like under ASICs, for example, it went relatively, I think in terms of the data that the regulator provided was better, in terms of it gave some clear examples in terms of how to report different instruments, whereas we didn't see such clear examples under kind of some other regulators, which, in terms of, which obviously helped in terms of, you can very quickly, when you're testing what your data looks like, it's very easy to say, well, I've done this trade. Is this what the regulators expected? Otherwise, what we've seen in terms of from a practitioner point of view is the first time you've done your quality assurance, what's then happened is all these errors have been identified because you didn't read page 300 of a 600-page document, which is buried somewhere in the text in terms of how you should report. Of course, the quality assurance providers out there do a good job of mapping that, but you feel like you should be able to do it up front. Now, of course, with the DRR and actually with some of the tools which are coming available, you can kind of pre-validate that data. But I do think this standardization approach, I mean, one of the things we also talked about, in terms of the kind of the just providing data via APIs to regulators, the only problem there is what does it happen? Is it a fire or forget type process? Because of course, a lot of the regulation do say, yes, you need to reconcile your data, make sure you're reporting it correctly. And if you're just providing the data, on an API feed, how are you ever going to do that?
Interesting. Well, I think the point is the validation, the onus of validation still remains with the data contributor, right? The fact that you've taken a template away doesn't actually relieve you of that obligation. Good stuff. We got another audience poll coming up, asking about where folks are in terms of reporting maturity. So if we can pull that poll up right now, we've got largely spreadsheet-based manual controls, automation silo, business line or jurisdiction, end-to-end automation with exception workflows and DQIs monitored, near real-time automation, proactive controls, dashboards, and then all of the above, depending on market and jurisdiction. Obviously, for the bigger firms, you're probably going to tick all of those boxes at some part of the organization. So whilst everybody's thinking about that and voting, let's get to our next question, which is really what practical steps have really moved the needle most in terms of data quality, lineage controls, reconciliation, materiality thresholds. And I'm going to ask Catherine to start us on this one.
Thank you, Adrian. I'll talk briefly. I think from our perspective, we would say, unsurprisingly, that the role of international standards and identifiers has moved the needle a lot. As I said, we issue CFI, UPI and ISIN, and that general standardization piece has been a huge focus on that since the financial crisis. So that's where our identifiers came from, but more broadly, it's where the LEI came from. And then you have the G20 Oversight Committee, the ROC, also looking at critical data elements too, so that if it's not an identifier, how are those standards, those individual elements to be reported to try and improve the consistency. So the regulatory factors are invariably the primary driver there for standardization. But I think what's been quite positive about this is it's been very much a public sector, private sector collaboration. And I think that helps to drive it forward because it will be continual evolution. It's not a one-stop and job done. And in terms of why I think that's moved data quality forward, a couple of reasons being, as I said in the earlier point, you're minimizing the data points, but then those data attributes wrapped in the ISO wrapper, be they the ISIN or the LEI, they benefit from normalization and validation. And a simple example there would be, I talked earlier about some OTC derivatives have an underlying basket made of constituents. So when those are input, the DSB will put those in the same order to make sure that there's consistency. Now, if you've just got 2 constituents, it's not a big deal for firms to enter them in the same order or to regulators to normalise. But if you're talking hundreds of constituents, then there's that benefit there as well.
Yeah.
So yes, I think I'll stop there. And
okay, that was helpful, Mark. I think you had some thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the code data quality, I think what most firms need to start is the reconciliation process, looking at completeness. So yeah, the first thing you do is look at completeness, then look at accuracy. I agree in terms of identifiers. The identifiers having the ISINs and derivative ISINs is very, very helpful because you don't have to then capture all the other data points. I think over the last kind of probably 5 years, you've got lots of quality assurance providers as well who can take your data and they can scrub your data on it, and it's getting the shorter and shorter time period in order to do that. And now we're having this kind of on-demand quality assurance, which I think when firms start using these quality assurance providers, most people have huge back reporting projects, but it really does highlight in terms of the quality of those data of those providers in terms of what they're doing, and the technology is now established that it can be done so much quicker. And we know that the regulators like those quality assurance providers. In fact, we know that some of those regulators actually use quality assurance providers looking at their own data. So I think that is also one of the big things which over the last 5 years has improved the quality. But also the other thing I would say is moving to EMEA, moving to an XML format. That has helped in terms of that standardization process as well.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so we've got another audience poll. Lots of audience polls. So go on, Doug.
Okay, so I couldn't agree more with both Catherine and Mark's points. I think that's absolutely right. Both the leaning into data standards has been a huge improvement. It's also led firms to ask themselves questions about what do we trade, which historically wasn't as clear. The collaboration between the industry and the regulators is a huge step forward. Instead of us versus them, it's now a collaborative effort of how we move forward together. And this goes back to the point we made in poll 1. It's what does a regulator want? And what are they trying to achieve? What are they looking for? Because when they write the rules, they have an idea in mind of what they want. But when they write the rules, they because they're not necessarily experts in the operations or the business, they will write this in unstructured words, what we want to achieve. When we try to turn that into code, then we have the risk of transforming that incorrectly, mistranslating the requirement into the rule, because the way we view the world and how we view our instruments is very different to the way the regulator does. So now sitting in a room with the regulator at the point when they're drafting the rules, finding out what they actually want, and then say, okay, this is how we process this information. These are the data points you will need if you want to monitor how we do this. And that's been a huge benefit for both us in understanding what they want, and for them in educating them how to write the rules. So I think it's been a huge improvement.
Yeah, so it's a good point. And I think I get the sense there's like a leveling going on between the regulatory side of the world and those who are regulated, given that there are a lot of common challenges, right? We're living in this increasingly digital, hugely digital world these days, and regulators face the same technology challenges that we all do, right? So that I think I certainly sense over the last 12, 18 months, there's a lot more interaction, if you like, around some of these key issues, particularly from the FCA, I think, and MAS. These guys are really basically opening up to give people the opportunity to interact, not on a one-to-one basis, which seems to make people nervous, but certainly, if the FCA has 200 people in the room, there's 200 collective voices and one regulator, then people perhaps feel more comfortable about standing up and talking about the issues that are difficult. And I know, certainly the regs, they're deploying AI or looking at basically leveraging technology to do more with less. That's the challenge which we all seem to have.
Yeah, so we have there's a the FCA run a quarterly discussion with the industry, as you said, in a large course. I'm on their advisory board for regulatory data.
Yeah.
I run the Data Standards Committee for the Bank of England and the FCA and the PRA. And so that is a partnership between the regulator and the industry. And we have similar sessions with ESMA, as well as all of our regulators across the pond in the US, as well as in Asia. So it's absolutely now we go forward together as a group, rather than us finding out the rules that when they throw them across the fence.
Right. I'm going to just pull up the poll results, Jerry, and here we go. Some interesting ones here on the maturity side. A third of people basically saying that they're all pretty much already there. Is that a surprise? Does that feel about right? Mark of Dodd. I mean, any other surprises here?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see that so many people feel that they're there. I mean that's great, and I think you probably see that probably more with the older regulations like MiFID. I still think there's a number of organisations with the new kind of EMIR refit who aren't quite there. Yeah, still finding lots of things under once you've done your periodic quality assurance checks. But I mean, this is very it's good to see.
Yeah.
I am a little bit surprised, to be honest.
Okay.
Because the reason why I'm a bit surprised is because the velocity of regulatory change has increased over the years to now, as Mark pointed out earlier, last year we had 3 or 4 of the largest go lives that we've ever had all at the same time. So every time a change takes place, you have to refigure all of your controls, all your dashboards, all your reconciliations. And the industry is made up of, it's made up of lots of different players doing lots of different things. I am surprised that so many people are of that level of maturity.
Yeah, I have to say that kind of hit me that, wow, it's, I mean, given the complexity, and as you say, the rate of change, although I think last year maybe might have been an anomaly. We had multiple things converging, refits and regulatory updates. And I think there were like 64 changes of government last year around the world, including the UK and here in the US. And that's had some obviously pretty major effects on basically the people that run the regulators at the end of the day. So I was going to sort of talk about some other things, but I'm looking at the time, moving on. So I'm going to jump to another topic now, which is, how do you operationalize horizon scanning and impact assessment across jurisdictions so that rule changes translated into actionable updates and policies, controls, and systems? And you've already touched on this, Dodd. So I'm going to ask Catherine, I think you had some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, again, DSB's role is we provide the ISIN, so we're acting as a service to firms, and therefore we don't need to do the same horizon scan and the interpretation that firms do. So our focus is when those upcoming rules do come out, which pertain to the identifiers we release, what can we do to support those firms? Can we mutualize that burden somehow, because we're in the center with them connecting to us? So I'll provide a couple of examples of what we do, and hope that supports the industry in relation to our identifiers. First of all, in terms of the UPI rollout, so Adrian, you said an awful lot happened last year, and the start of the UPI rollout was one that was in 5 jurisdictions, and we have another 5 jurisdictions this year. The UPI is overseen by the G20 committee, the Regulatory Oversight Committee. So we meet with one of their subcommittees monthly. It's our channel in. So we talk to them about what's planned, when is each jurisdiction planning to release or implement their rules. And when we know they're in the pipeline, we liaise with the relevant regulators and in-region market participants. So we'll try and promote that as soon as we know, on social media, on our website. We host a webinar. So for each launch in each jurisdiction, we've usually had a webinar, usually jointly with the regulators, translated where required. So we've done it in Korean, Japanese, and Mexican, or Spanish, but Spanish Mexican, to make sure that And we'll make awareness that we have our UAT environment open and they can use that for 6 months for free. And then on our website, we have a table where we list all the rules and the deadlines coming to. So we try to provide, I mean, it is a subset of all the other reporting requirements, which are vast that firms have to put in place, but we do try to be supportive in that area. And then on a more practical implementation measure, or level, things we do, for example, the UPI and the ISIN work together. So the UPI is a less granular identifier or a subset of data elements in the ISIN. So when the UPI was launched, we had the DSB has some industry advisory groups, and as Dodd said, he chairs one. Our technical advisory committee asked if we could leverage our existing ISIN database to create some UPIs and kind of pre-populate the database. So from that, we created about 600 UPIs in advance of the start date. And that was to just try and alleviate the need from firms to do a big create right at the start. So we will work with industry, and if there are practical implementation things that we can do technically, we will look to do that as well. But appreciate that is one particular space when firms have got very broad horizon scanning obligations.
Yeah. Dodd, any other additional thoughts on this one?
So yes, I mean, I run a function at Deutsche Bank for horizon scanning. Why do we do it? Well, we do it because, exactly as Catherine said, we need to prepare in advance, right? There's lots of work to be done. We need to know where in the future this compliance state is, and we need to work backwards to a date when we would start resource allocation, start on business requirements, translation of the regulatory documents, etc., etc. So mobilizing within the firm in order to meet that obligation. But if we go even before that, how do you identify that a document has been published in a location where you are active, which you need to comply with? And that's the underlying difficulty of horizon scanning. It's knowing something has been published somewhere which will impact you as a firm. Now, our horizon scanning at the moment, we probably go through a couple of thousand documents a month because we have a global footprint and we are active in many markets. Yep. And when we think about regulatory publications, the publishers are variable, right? So you can have an exchange, you can have a regulator, you can have a CCP, you can, there are so many different bodies that can release regulatory change documents, and you need to be able to see them all and then assess them all for their applicability to your firm, and then whether they're actionable. If they're actionable by whom and when. Right. So at the moment, most regulatory documents are unstructured text. So actually horizon scanning, which is scanning the market for publications, is extremely difficult. There are a few big vendors out there who provide that data, but when it comes down to, is it applicable to your firm? You need to have the right people in the right place to look through those documents and say, this is applicable to us and it's actionable and it by these people, which is extremely difficult and very costly to do. So what I'm working with the Bank of England on at the moment is how to turn those regulatory documents into structured delivery, structured text, so that we can put some metadata in there, so it'll tell you what the regulation is, who it applies to, what the dates are. And so all of the really high level, really important stuff can be pulled out of the document automatically. And then that can feed into a horizon scanning software, which then will plot out where these obligations are.
Right. Good. Okay, we've got some audience questions actually, and one has got 4 upvotes, so I've got to ask this one. The first is basically says, how likely are we going to see single-sided reporting? Is this something that the regulators are considering? I'll paraphrase seriously, and likely to take on, or is this an industry dream? Come on, Dodd, you're up.
So we did advocacy work on this in 2014 when EMIR went live in the first place. That single-sided reporting was the right way to go. CFTC was already live. It was single-sided. It has been what's the word for it? It has been something the regulator has resisted since then. They've always believed dual-sided, as Catherine said earlier, leads to better data quality.
Yeah.
Now, whether can we persuade them differently? There's a different mindset in the industry at the moment, not in the industry, in the regulatory community, driven by the economy and driven by political change. That says that actually the cost of reporting on the industry is too high, and that leads to less firms having less to invest in the markets, i.e. not doing loans to small, medium enterprises, for example. We're not creating a better economy. So they want to see us reduce that. And so, yes, there is an opportunity. We need to be very, very careful in how we advocate for it and what we can do internally to say, okay, we are going to measure, as Mark said earlier, we're going to measure our own completeness and accuracy, and we will be able to give you that to show that we are undertaking this work diligently. And that way we could hopefully find a way of getting them to agree to single-sided. At the moment, I would say it's about 50-50, which is probably the best it's ever been in terms of the chances of us getting into single-sided.
Yeah, if we're moving in the if we're actually at 50-50 as opposed to we were 60-40 against, then that's obviously an improvement.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
I'm probably adding to that. I mean, one thing I would say is if you look at ASICs, so under ASICs, you can do single-sided, you can rely on single-sided reporting if you're under a certain derivative notional, which many investment firms, or funds essentially will be. But even there is a requirement that you're trading with a counterparty who then has an ASICs reporting requirement. So the trade needs to be routed to Australia. Now, and you think, well, that's fine, but it obviously creates complications with and limitations the counterparty you're trading with. So then, then creates another decision point in terms of, do you want to limit your counterparty, or how are you treating your clients if you do that? So
I completely agree with that, Mark. The complexity comes in, how do I know my counterparty has a reporting obligation in Australia and I can rely on them to report? So you're changing the problem statement. Yeah. But if we look at South Africa, for example, which is going to go live in a year and a half with their OTC reporting rules, they've actually designated a set of people as derivative providers. So they're the bigger firms, the more sophisticated firms. They say, you will always report. Now, that means that almost all of the rest of the market have no reporting obligation ever. So I think there is maybe we just need to rethink how we offer single-sided reporting and change the rules so that people are very certain that they know when they have a reporting obligation, and that will reduce the risk of no one reporting.
Okay, I'm going to jump on because time always flies when you're having fun. So let's change tack a little bit again. So talking about this time around KPIs, KRIs, dashboards. So, what are the tools that really help you manage reporting risk? Around timeliness, completeness, resubmission rates, exception aging. How do you use those to drive continuous improvement and audit readiness? And I'm going to come to Catherine because this sounds like an argument for standardization.
Well, I think that's probably true. What I was going to say is how what the DSB does, because obviously we don't have the reporting obligations on firms. We're more of a central hub. So what we do is we are subject to some SLAs, and they're public on our website. And then we also publish our metrics against those SLAs on a monthly basis, because I think firms need to know that we are operationally stable and reliable, and that they can continue to meet their obligations based on what we do. And this is a slight tangent from the trade reporting piece, but with the implementation or introduction of DORA earlier this year, a big part of that is that financial firms which have third parties have to have those SLAs and the KPIs in place. So we publish targets in our latency, how quickly we create ISINs and UPIs, and on a monthly basis, the metrics to show we're meeting those. And another thing is operational availability as well. In terms of dashboards, which can firms meet their reporting obligations, What we have had, I don't know if this quite answers the question, but we have had some feedback from traders repositories which say when they look at their matching rates and where are those data errors, UPIs are quite low down the rate, which is kind of positive for us. Those are not generally the data elements which seem to be the most problematic or challenging for firms.
That's interesting. And I guess reassuring in a way. And Mark, I think you had some thoughts on KPIs, KRIs, and oversight. In terms of
in terms of, I mean, I always start with completeness. So the first thing is looking at completeness. Have that completeness reconciliation on a daily basis. Then looking at timeliness, there was a requirement in most jurisdictions to report on a T+1 basis. So we'll have daily monitoring of that. And then I guess, once you've got that completeness and accuracy, then it's kind of looking at your accuracy process. So in terms of, I guess the first thing is accuracy based on your own books and records. Are you reporting how you expect to report? And then probably based on your risk profile, what quality assurance checks do you do? For example, we have a larger population of MiFID reporting. So we do quality assurance, external quality assurance checking on a quarterly basis. And then on a EMEA, we have less. So we're doing quality assurance on a 6 monthly basis for that. And then looking at that, making sure you're following a downward trend, you're tracking where you do have errors, that those errors are being raised and tracked and progress is being made, and you're correctly prioritizing this. Because if anybody ever comes in and audits you and says, what are your controls, what are your processes, it needs to be very clearly documented that you've recognized this issue, you've raised it as an error submissions, you're going to fix it. But is it noise, in which case the regulators maybe don't mind so much, but is it something fundamental? Is it some notional which you're not calculating correctly? But you've got to make progress. You can't just say, it doesn't affect my day-to-day run of the business. You've got to be seen to make progress and seen to be accurate.
Yep. This is an interesting question here. This might be from a vendor, but it's got an upvote, so I will give it a shot. We see clients adopting advanced reporting tech at very different speeds. So in the panel's view, what governance and cultural factors most influence whether a firm can successfully implement automation and AI without introducing new compliance risks? Dowd.
Regulatory ambiguity at the moment. So it's difficult to deploy regulation, AI, for example, especially when it's a black box. So we would need to be able to reverse engineer from any decision into how it made its decision, which really negates all the benefits of AI in the first place. So I think that's the first thing to say. When you're looking at regulatory compliance, you need a person in the loop. And if you have a person in the loop, then a lot of the benefits of AI disappear. So there is that. The other thing to note is it takes a long time for a large firm to onboard a vendor, because you've got a whole vendor risk management process that most firms have to go through. They have to have a certain size of capital. They have to, before you can deploy something that from a new vendor, there's a lot of hurdles to go through. So we tend to work with only the larger ones, who then have a long development cycle, because in order to deploy into a financial industry firm, into a large firm, there are a lot of checks and things have to take place before it will go, before we can put it in place. We have to prove that it's trustworthy. We have to prove that it's stable. So that's why we aren't as agile as some of the smaller new firms that are coming into the market now.
Right. Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from kind of the man side, we have used kind of AI tools. Probably the first thing you start with, kind of for us in terms of those AI tools, is kind of privacy point. So we have built our own AI tools. So we've got something called ManGPT and bots feeding off that ManGPT, but it's based on our data set. It doesn't go into the wider data set. What we haven't done is, we're not using it to create niche, like we're not using it to create regulatory reporting, but what some of the tools we do use, in terms of, for example, like summarizing documents, very, very good. These kind of GPT tools are very good for that. Yep. Very good for improving, for example, errors and omission reports. We have used it to kind of, fed all the data from our kind of procedures and Confluence sites on top of it, so you can question your data, but it's your data and it's linked back to your data, so you're kind of, I suppose, you're less likely to get kind of false decisions. And I suppose a lot of kind of the automation and kind of the AI tools, you do want that auditability in terms of how do you put some data in here, how did it get to here. So for a smaller firm, so some things you might want to use it for is, if you've got like a small amount of, let's say, SFTR reports you've got to do, but you've got a spreadsheet, you've got to put it into XML, and you don't necessarily have, the developers to do that for you. What you can do is use, some like a Python tool to do it. If you write it into AI, it will tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
In a very quick way, and
Yes.
use AI and Copilot tools are great, absolutely great for those kind of things, and just kind of speeding up the quality of what you're doing.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, well, we're down to our we're actually under the 4-minute mark now. So I'm going to run to probably take a forward-looking view and get some final thoughts from the panel. So over the coming 12 to 18 months, where do you see the biggest opportunities in reducing regulatory data management and reporting complexity? And what are the top 2 or 3 takeaways you would highlight from today's discussion and for our audience? And I'll start with Catherine.
I think it goes back a bit to the question which Dodd spoke about, which is, can you remove? Will we really remove dual-sided reporting? I would say the biggest opportunity at the moment is, I think it is the openness of the EU and UK regulators to look at this, and willingness to look at some changes. So when we had the financial crisis, since then there's been a big uplift, and that drove everything. It made much more intense regulations, and I think now we have reached a point where both in the EU and the UK, they are prepared to take a step back and look and see and listen. So I think that's where it is, and I agree with what Dodd said, that it's not definite, but I think they are listening, and the fact that, for example, dual-sided reporting is in ESMA's corporate evidence means that they know that is a particular burden. So I think that's the opportunity for firms to, it's now's the right time to engage and in a very constructive and collaborative way. So knowing that the worries for regulators is, can you maintain data quality? We want to keep certain critical data. How can you manage that by still reducing it for them? So I think that's where I would see the opportunity at the moment, I think.
Super. Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would add the same. And we talked about ESMA coming up, but also obviously the FCA asked very similar questions regarding MiFID and how to improve MiFID reporting. So it's very similar, much more engaged. I sit on the investment association. We get the FCA coming very regularly to speak to us and what works and what doesn't work. It's great. It's great to see, and to reduce the cost burden on firms. It's not going to be next year, but we're laying the foundations.
Yeah. Good stuff. And Dowd, I started with you, so I'm going to give you the final word.
So I wholeheartedly agree with Catherine and Mark on the simplification being one element of this, leaning into data standards, maybe even looking to develop new ones to take the burden away from reporting firms on a trade-by-trade basis. So that's definitely there. I think as the regulators get more comfortable with AI or firms using AI, then hopefully we'll find, as Mark pointed out, there are several really good things that he was talking about there around like errors and corrections, how to standardize those and how we move in that direction. Removing the ambiguity from regulatory text, leaning into digital regulatory reporting. I think they're all great initiatives, and they will all lead to huge positive outcomes for the industry, and more importantly, better data quality for the regulator.
Okay, that's a great note to finish on. So all that's left for me now is to thank our panel of experts, Emma, Dowd, Catherine, and Mark. And thanks to our sponsors, Derivative Service Bureau. You'll find their details on the screen that's in front of you right now. Reminder about the upcoming events. Don't forget to check those out. And one last final request: at the bottom of the screen, there's a feedback form. If you please complete that and let us know your thoughts on on today's webinar. Please share your feedback. That helps us to do a better job in the future. So without any further ado, I would like to thank you all, thank our audience, and until the next time, goodbye.